How's it going, everybody? I'm Chris. Thanks for joining for our live Q&A with director, writer, producer Lee Dong from Stealing School. How's it going?
Going good, man. How are you?
Really, really great. This film, to me, I think it's a really interesting and unique movie. It's a courtroom sort of drama, which I thought was really, really cool. What was the genesis of this story? Where did the idea come from?
I was really inspired by this. There's this Israeli movie called Get, Gett. It was also kind of a courtroom drama. It was set in like one room. And that movie was an Israeli movie about a woman just trying to get a divorce, which apparently very difficult. Had no idea. Learned a lot about their culture. And I just remember I was really struck with how in that movie, using that one room and one sort of like story device, they were able to get a lot of drama and get a lot of comedy and like some suspense. And they were also able to, teach me a lot about their culture and just talk about a variety of things like, what does it mean to be a good husband and what does it mean to be a man of faith and, what does it mean to be divorced or not divorced or together or separated or whatever. And I thought that if I was going to make a first movie, it should be something like that, where you have this story vehicle that you can sort of use to talk about all the things that you care about, but also be a lot of different tones. Hopefully, I like to think that my movie's very funny, but also takes on serious subjects such as race and gender and the importance of an Ivy League education. So I don't know anything about Israeli divorces, so I had to come up with my own thing. And so I just sat and thought, and I remember thinking about remembering these sort of like I remember hearing about these tribunals. I mean, have you heard about these tribunals, these sort of academic trials for plagiarism, Christopher?
Not directly, no.
Correctly?
I no, not
When I was in
really.
university and when I was an undergrad in law school, you used to hear about these things. They're kind of whispered in academic circles. I thought that was really funny because it's like they're not lawyers that are in these rooms, right? They're all people trying to, they're all people that work in academics and they're trying to figure out, whether they cheated or not. And I thought that was a really interesting position for people to be in where they're pretending to be a lawyer or a judge and they have no legal training. So I remember those trials, and I thought maybe that would make an interesting story, and you could add like a certain mystery element where the audience didn't really know whether they were guilty or not, and it kind of just grew from there in terms of me talking about the things that I wanted to talk about, which included a list of the themes that I mentioned previous.
Right. Um, so 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 in terms of them being inspired by, sort of the movie being inspired by real events, what was sort of the research process like
Um,
specifically?
Well, real events. Well, research wise, I called a lot of my academic friends. I'm not an academic, by the way. I went to law school. It's just because I wanted a real job, and now I work in film. So really, how far did that get me, right? But in terms of research, I tried to call a lot of academic friends. I was like, hey, do you know anything about this? A lot of TAs I know, and they kind of they pointed me to some resources, and they were like, this is how school A handles a plagiarism trial. This is how school B handles it. School C. And the crazy wild thing was they all handled it completely different. Like sometimes there's three judges, sometimes there's one, sometimes it goes all day, sometimes it's an hour. So that was part of the research. And the other thing that was not necessarily research, but just things that I had heard about was that Asian students in North America and Canada and the United States were sort of being discriminated against in the sense that a lot of overseas students would be perceived as more likely to cheat, specifically on humanities essays such as English or history or political science, things like that, and they were being caught for it, and there was a real culture. There seemed to be a real culture clash in which the students from Asia didn't think it was such a big deal, and of course it's taken very very seriously in colleges in the West. So I thought that was interesting, and I thought that that would be an interesting way for an Asian. In my movie, it's an Asian Canadian, but I suppose you can might as well be an Asian American clashing with an American institution in that sort of conflicty way. So that was kind of the research that was essentially the basis for the research, and everything else was just procedural. I really wanted to know what the room looked like and how things operated, and like whether you were even allowed to bring in witnesses or not, which happens in my movie. And it turns out that you are. So yeah, I basically just asked every person who was university adjacent, whether this plot that I was putting together made any sense.
Got it. Got it. Was it a challenge to cast? Because, as you mentioned and alluded to, part of the appeal of this to you was that it was one room and it was very dialogue heavy. And I think those kinds of scripts, obviously, you're going to need, actors that can then make that happen. So, what was sort of the process like of finding people to play these roles?
Well, we had a great casting agent, or casting director here in Toronto, and she was able to. First of all, you're right. The script is very dialogue-y, but actors seem to like that, including very seasoned actors. And there's a lot of like very seasoned actors here in Toronto who are on like all the TV shows that are filmed here, like Designated Survivor, and I think Umbrella Academy shot here as well. So there are a lot of Canadian TV people that you might recognize who are looking for bigger roles. So I was able to be put in touch with them. In terms of the Asian lead, that was tough because of not dumb, but like boring union reasons. I couldn't really hire an American, so I had to find an Asian woman actor who could handle the role in Canada and basically in Toronto because I wasn't going to fly anyone down from Vancouver or whatever. So we had to like we essentially auditioned every Asian female actress in Toronto, and thankfully we stumbled upon Celine, who I think does a great job. But yeah, no, the casting, I went in thinking like this is going to be like really hard, or like it was a low budget movie, we're not paying any money really, and no one's going to want to do it. But it turns out a lot of really good actors who've been on much bigger shows than mine and bigger movies than mine were very interested in the script because I I I tried to write the characters as like every character, even a minor character, had like some third dimension, some motive that was deep within them, and they weren't just like a surface level character. They weren't just there to like, do one thing and leave. I wanted all the characters to be whole. So I suspect that some of the actors who got the script were drawn to that, and they agreed to do it for like in very arduous conditions. The room was really hot, and our days were long, and of course the money thing was not great. So yeah, that's what the casting process was like. It was a very pleasant surprise for me, I would say.
You're mentioning sort of working in Canada. Of course, you're Canadian. The film is Canadian. I actually, I'm not too familiar with the Canadian sort of independent film scene currently. I'm wondering, can you speak to, or do you have any ideas of the sort of the difference between working in Canada in the low budget film space
Oh,
versus the US?
yeah, I don't think I just don't think I have enough experience. It says I'm a producer on the movie, but I'm like just a producer by name, basically.
Right,
But
right.
I didn't actually do any real producing. Like I had say in all the casting and things like that, and the departments and whatnot. I can't really speak that much on behalf of the Canadian independent movie scene. We do get government funding if you're in the right stratosphere of clout.
So
Um,
I've heard.
yeah, yeah, and so like it's the old chicken and the egg thing where it's like, well, if you've made a movie, we'll let you make another movie. But then it's like, well, how can I make a movie if I haven't made a movie? It's like, well, you figure that out. I'm slowly learning on my own, but there does seem to be a swell of support and money and funding and programs to help emerging Canadian voices. Because the idea of Canadian films and Canadian culture is very important to us because we're very similar to the Americans, and if we don't fund our own stories, then there's really no reason why we can't be swallowed up by your culture completely, right? Like, because you can't you guys we can't be swallowed up by the UK's culture because their cultures are so different. They have accents. I have to like watch it with subtitles, right? But like, there's no accent difference between me and you, I don't think, unless you can hear one.
I
So
don't know.
and there's not a lot of in terms of the big cities. There's not that many huge lifestyle differences as well. So if you're in Canada, there's no reason why you can't just have only a diet of American content. And of course, if you eradicate Canadian culture and Canadian content and Canadian voices, then you essentially lose any semblance of a national identity. So that's why the government's very hard on trying to propelled their own stories. So that's, I guess that is helpful with some government money. I mean, I haven't gotten a lot of it, but maybe now that I've made a movie, they'll be throwing buckets of money at me. Who knows?
There's I actually rewatched the film today in advance of this, and there's a scene in the movie where actually I think it's mentioned a couple times where they're talking about how you know the Canadian university has to they can't sink to the moral and ethical lows of the American universities. I mean, is there any? I was wondering, like, is there any truth to that? Was that like
Oh,
a real thing you
absolutely.
think that
Yeah,
they would say?
that's the whole thing. Like a lot of Canadians feel morally superior to the Americans in a lot of ways. By the way, you guys are making it really easy right now.
That's true.
And
That's true.
and so, but I will say that in the movie, I don't know if you caught this other part, but there's another plot line where there's well, actually, the lead character, she's a very brilliant computer scientist, and she has a job waiting for her in Silicon Valley, and that's where she
Right.
wants
Right.
to go, right? And so those
Right.
two things kind of work against each other. And I remember I showed it to an American friend, my best American friend. He lives in New York, sorry. And he said, "Hey, I liked the movie." And his first question was, "Why is it that all the characters in your movie shit on America, but at the same time, all the characters in your movie want to go work in America? Doesn't that seem like a contradiction to you?" And I said, "No, that's just being Canadian, unfortunately." It's
Right.
and I'm glad that you asked that, because maybe it doesn't, maybe that is the kind of thing that doesn't make sense to you, but I guarantee you that any Canadian who sees that is like, yeah, no, that's about right.
Well,
That's
yeah. Well, as a New Yorker, it makes sense to me because I often feel that I mean, it speaks to sort of the diversity and the size of the U.S. that I think San Francisco and New York, in some ways, feel like different countries relative to the America that gets the bad reputation, I guess that it
right.
gets.
Right.
It's a sort of a paradoxical thing, and I'm sure Canada. I'm sorry, I was going to say Canadian. I'm sure
Yeah.
Canada is similar, but I guess Americans don't really know anything about
There
that.
there are regional. I mean, I've heard there's some people, there's some culture thinkers that think that regionalism in Canada might be the biggest problem to Canadian society, in the sense that like people in the West,
Right.
people in the middle part, and the prairies, and Ontario, and the east coast of Canada, and Quebec all have completely different interests and sort of don't like each other, and that at some point this is going to tear Canada apart. Not to turn this into a Canadian political science lesson,
No, no,
but
it's
yes,
okay.
that does exist in Canada as well. And I live in Toronto. I'm told that everybody else that doesn't live in Toronto kind of hates Toronto and people from Toronto, perhaps in
Mm,
the same way that people hate people from New York. Yeah.
maybe. Um, but where does where does immigration enter into the equation? Of course, because that is a big part of the film as well. That well, we talked before about maybe avoiding spoilers, but I think that you know, the lead character, her family, like her relationship with her family, her immigrant family, is so crucial to the film. So in terms of what that's like in Canada versus the U.S., what's sort of the what can you speak about that?
I'm not sure if I can draw a slight a difference between in terms of viewing people of color between Canada and U.S. I would, what I was trying to show in this movie, specifically because it's a Canadian movie, was that hey, we're actually kind of as bad as the United States, or we might not be as loud about it. We might not get as much international coverage as the racial incidents that happen in the states, but we do have our own brand of Canadian racism that's a little softer, that's a little bit quieter, but it does exist. That's what I was trying to draw between the difference between the Canadians and the Americans in the movie. Like again, the characters think that they're better than the Americans, but the movie's trying to say no, you're not actually. And the fact that you think you're better than some country that is not doing a good job does not mean that you're doing a good job. That was the one thing. In terms of being an immigrant child, or being an immigrant, being a child of immigrants, this is a place where I don't think you'd really need to draw a difference between the Asian Americans and Asian Canadians, in my opinion. I haven't met a lot of Asian Americans, but we seem to have similar life problems, or life struggles, and one of them is that I tried to show in the movie is just this profound sense of disconnect from your parents, in the sense that you live in the West, you live in New York, I live in Toronto. I'm trying to live like a Toronto life. I'm trying to do Toronto things. I'm trying to live like a Western kid because that's all I know growing up. And my parents are trying to push me in a different direction because they're trying to steer my life in a way that they think is successful. They think is right, whether that be go be a doctor or or saying that like finishing university is like the most important thing in your life. Of course, we know in the tech industry in Silicon Valley that being a sort of a college dropout and being really successful is like almost a cliche, right? Like people just do it and people want to do it and you can do it. But you tell that to an Asian parent, they're not going to understand you. So there's this pressure to do this thing that they think is important, but also live life the way that you want to live it. Um, and I think that causes a lot of mental anguish and duress for a lot of Asian Canadians and Asian Americans.
Thank you for that. I think we can go back to more less deep topics and talk more about the film and the production. What would you say was the biggest obstacle that you had to overcome on set? So when you're actually bringing your story to life, what was the biggest obstacle?
I mean, I wish there was like some big thing, but like it's just like all indie movies. I think probably with a lot of indie movies that are in your festival right now, it's just always like money and time related. We had we shot in one room, but it was like 13 days, I think. And on one of the days, it was raining really badly, and so it was loud, and we couldn't point the camera towards the window. So then we're like, what do we do? We didn't plan for this, so we had to kind of find a weird workaround and film in ways that the actors were where I had to basically make a call that threw everyone else's plans in the trash. Like the actors, the art department, the cinematographers, they all plan for the day. They know they're going to do it, and then because it's raining, I have to think of a whole new way to do things, and then I do that, and then it screws everyone else up, and that can cause a lot of confusion and waste time and things like that. So the rainstorm was really bad. That room was extremely hot. It doesn't really show, although I wish it did. But it was really really hot. There's no air conditioning in there, and people got really sweaty. But yeah, basically just things like that. You always want more time to shoot things. You always want to set up the cool dolly shot where the camera like goes here and then spins around, and then it's like a nice oneer, and then it goes out the door. But you just don't have time to do that. I basically only had time to shoot the story and make sure that everyone said the right things in the right order and showed the right emotions and the right character arcs and whatnot, and then that's about it. Yeah, but I think it's on any indie production. Those are the main challenges, I would say.
Excellent. And in that same vein, this is a question from the audience. What were ways that you were able to make? What were the techniques that made shooting in one room interesting? How did you?
Oh,
What techniques did you use to make that
yeah.
exciting? Just being in one room.
Yeah. Well, this is something that I kind of borrowed, stole, whatever you want to say, from that other movie. Yeah, and also like other courtroom dramas, like because a lot of them are one rooms, or a lot of them are in the courtroom, and you just gotta. And I watch them, and there's different things you can do with lighting. There's things that you can, you know, there's a string of witnesses that come into my courtroom essentially, but my courtroom's not set up like a courtroom, so there's no witness box, right? So, for example, certain witnesses stood in the middle of the room, certain witnesses stood in the corner of the room, and in the final scene, the two witnesses stand in the other corner of the room, and so the lighting changes for each of those, the sort of angles change, and it feels like you're going into a new place. It feels like something new is happening. You're like, oh, we're not back in this camera setup again. So little things like that, I think, help propel the story and helped, not have so much repetition, so that the audience would not get visually bored of the same thing that seemed to be happening over and over again. Plus, I did try to leave the room as much as I could, through flashback scenes, through going to the bathroom, through having conversations in the hallway, through little things outside. I tried to add as much variety as I absolutely could, but with respect to the one room, yeah, even with the one room, you try to add as much variety that you can, and still have it like make sense. There's probably would have been some stuff that I would have done if I had more money, like like just the overhead shot that makes things different a little bit. so you just have to be creative, and I think a lot of directors who work on low budget stuff will tell you the same thing, which is that, well, I didn't want to do it this way, but because we had no money, we thought of a creative way to do this, and it turns out the creative way was better than the way that we would have done if we had money. And of course, my story is no different. Like, we had to make a lot of, weird decisions, and it turns out the weird decisions I really liked, and I thought it really worked.
You have an example of something like in the writing process that you just completely had to lose, like you couldn't even get in
I
there?
well, I would like to think that I would like people to think that the movie came out exactly as it was in my head. There was a certain subplot that we had to lose because it just didn't make any sense, uh, or it made the movie too complicated. I can tell you this. I will say this. There was a subplot that involved, for those who have seen the movie, the two white judges, they kind of like fell in love, or there's kind of like a romantic comedy vibe subplot, and that had a little bit more. We shot more than was in the movie, and then in editing we had to sort of take it out because it was very distracting, and it didn't really have anything to do with the main story, and we took it out. But I really tried to like Trojan horse a romantic comedy in this movie, and I failed. That's fine. I failed. But like I'm gonna keep trying it on my next movie. Like, pretty much someone has to fall in love at the end of every movie, otherwise, what's the point? Um, so yeah, basically that was one thing that we had to sacrifice. That was more for story and less for budget or production reasons. But that was something that had to be left out to serve the bigger story.
So is it true you're working on a romantic comedy
It
next?
is. Yeah, yeah. I am currently working on a romantic comedy about two Asian millennials. I don't know how it's going to turn out or if I'm going to get to make it, but hopefully, yeah, yeah. So this way, so I figured they can't cut out my romantic comedy subplot line if the whole movie is a romantic comedy plot line.
Right, of course. We'll have to
That way they're getting me to get rid of this one. Yeah,
you'll have to cut out the courtroom subplot of
yeah,
this one.
exactly. Yeah,
No, it's a very funny movie. I this time I watched it again, like I said today, and I loved the names of their dissertations.
yeah.
Those are great gags. I thought that was so great. Those aren't real, are they?
No, actually. So I thought with them. I my best friend's an academic, and we kind of got drunk one night, and I'm like, listen, can you help me out with some of these? So like we would kind of go back and forth, and he would help me, and I would write something, and then he'd like, no, that doesn't make sense. Maybe try this. So we came up with those, a bunch of them on one drunken night, and then I put them in the movie. And whenever you make a movie, it has to go through a series of lawyers, and I can't remember what it's called. I think it might be called coverage or whatever, but I should know.
Mhm.
But basically, some poor lawyer had to like scour the internet and academic journals and look for these like weird thesis titles to make sure they weren't real thesis titles. Because if they were, I was basically infringing on their copyright. But so yeah, someone had to go. So some poor lawyer or intern probably, or junior lawyer at like at 1 in the morning had to search these academic databases for like you sank my battleship, you sank my battleship, the game theoretical approach to writer war protocols between American
Right.
navy and pleasure craft or something like that. So I thought that was
That was my favorite one. Yeah.
yeah, I thought that was really funny. I kind of wanted to send like a sorry note to the lawyer or whatever, but then I'm like, it's his job. He got paid for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, one more question from the audience. What was your favorite behind the scene moment?
Behind the scenes moment.
Yeah.
Um. Oh, okay. I know this one. So so the for me, the best part of making a movie is getting to work with a bunch of incredibly passionate and intelligent and creative people, right? I think my job's whatever important, but I'm always in awe of the work that other people do. And and just to give you an example, was there's a flashback scene with the main character. So the main character is an Asian girl, and she's like kind of edgy when you see her. But there's a flashback scene where she's supposed to be more innocent or more naive, essentially, right? And I basically turned to the makeup artist, Mel Quigg, and I said, "Hey, we need to make her look more younger and more naive and whatever." That was the only direction that I gave her, right? And so Mel's like, okay, got it. And she did her thing. And then the lead actress came in and she sat down and she started doing the scene and we started filming. And I was looking into the camera and I turned to Mel and I said, you know, like, I don't know what you did, but she really does look really younger and much more naive. And Melanie said, what I did was I gave her a part in the center of her hair. And she goes, you know, usually girls with the center part that really screams, I have no idea what the fuck's going on. And I was like, oh my God, I see it. That's awesome. I did not even notice that. Shout out to any women wearing center parts, by the way. But like the thing is, I would have never thought of that, right? It was a visual translation. It was a craft. She exercised her craft, translating my thought into something tangible and real and correct. And just seeing that happen was like magic to me, right? Because I would have never thought of that, and I can't think of things like that. So, and you know, there's a story like that for literally every department. Every actor would do something that I didn't tell them to do, but they did it, and I thought, oh my God, that's so right. So just seeing little moments like that where someone would be able to interpret the story better than I was able to explain it to them, and execute it better than I would have ever been able to execute it, were the best parts of making the movie behind the scenes for me.
That's awesome. That's a great example and a great story. I've definitely my filmmaking experience is not so extensive, but I've had moments like that, and it's really the magic of this collaborative medium we've decided to participate in.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for stealing school and also for your time. And I'd like to also congratulate you. You were one of our finalists for the Emerging Director Award for narrative features. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really once again want to thank you for the film and thank you for your time. And I'm looking forward to a romantic comedy.
Thank you.
And
story. Yeah.
Of course, doing this on a stage in New York with that.
Oh, I know. Next time, man.
Next time. All right. Take care.
Okay. Thank you.